As we make our way through 2025, there is no question that the political and cultural winds have changed regarding gender ideology. In many ways, it does appear that sanity is starting to prevail. For years, many desperately asked, is the tide finally turning against the madness? Have we reached the tipping point? For some time, hope appeared lost, but no more. One thing is certain. With the re-election of Donald Trump to the presidency in November, there could not be a starker contrast in terms of the posture of the national government. Now, instead of championing the cause of gender identity, federal agencies are taking legal action against institutions receiving taxpayer dollars that are pushing transgenderism in keeping with President Trump's executive orders. On his first day in office, the word woman was defined only by biology throughout the administrative state by one such executive order. On January 28th, Trump signed another order decrying the sterilization and mutilation of children under the banner of so-called gender-affirming care and called these experimental practices, quote, a stain on our nation's history, unquote, and demanding that it must end. The order further declared that medical institutions that continued to carry out the transing of minors would no longer receive federal funding. But even with this important leverage and the undeniable shifts now happening in the United States, there's a long way to go. The fallout is and will continue to be immense as our society finally begins to grapple with this long-awaited reckoning. I'm Brandon Showalter, and in this 5th season of Generation Indoctrination, we will be surveying the landscape in light of all the changes, while also taking a sober-minded look at what's ahead. Given the vast scope of the harm, there are many whose lives have been so shattered by gender ideology they now have to pick up the pieces. These stories must never be forgotten, and we plan to shed light on them. We'll take you inside the battles as they unfolded in families, in clinical settings, in the halls of legislative chambers, and inside the office of the Attorney General of Alabama. We'll start our journey in Washington, D.C. In Season 3 of this podcast series, we spoke with Dr. Jay Richards, a fellow with the Heritage Foundation, the nation's preeminent conservative think tank, which has led the charge in the fight against gender ideology. In October, at the Christian Post's second Unmasking Gender Ideology event at Burke Community Church, Jay made a World War II analogy, likening where we are in this fight to the Allied forces reaching Midway Island and then Guadalcanal, but we hadn't reached Normandy yet. But in light of the election and what has happened since Trump's inauguration, I felt it important to ask, where are we now?
We have secured the beach, but Berlin is still a long ways away. I wouldn't say that the outcome is inevitable, but I think we're in a position to see and to make some fairly precise predictions about how we think this thing is going to play out, even though I imagine the major fighting will continue for a couple of years. To reach Berlin, the first thing that has to happen is that the pediatric gender clinics have to close. Even though this is in some ways the most visceral and intense sort of aspect of the fight against gender ideology, I think in some ways legally it's the low-hanging fruit. The truth of the matter is that pediatric gender, quote, doctors and practitioners are involved with something that, to put it as charitably as possible, is experimental. They're now acting in a situation in which there are over a dozen systematic reviews of the evidence showing the lack of value and efficacy of these interventions. They're acting in the context that the Department of Health and Human Services has issued its own report, a so-called umbrella report, surveying the data and also analyzing the ethical implications of this and concluding, again, that there's no good reason that doctors should be doing this. They're also acting in the context of something like 15 lawsuits brought, for the most part, on behalf of detransitioners, that is, kids who were subjected to these treatments. 1 or 2 of those lawsuits get settled, and the malpractice insurance rates for continuing these procedures are just going to go through the roof. Now, as a policy person who really wants to see this stuff vanquished, it's not emotionally satisfying to say that gender clinics will probably close down because of economic viability or lack of viability. But I think that's the most likely outcome. It's not going to be, for the most part, criminalization. It's just going to be impossible for doctors, no matter how badly they want to keep doing it, to actually be able to do it in the regulatory environment. But that's not winning. That's a major battle. That's the pediatric gender medicine battle. We haven't taken care of the online influencers that indoctrinate children, that love bomb them. We haven't taken care of the teachers and the school curricula that teaches gender ideology in every class from art and history to science and math. Until children are not taught to entertain the possibility that they are born in the wrong body, we will not have emerged victoriously. In other words, we will not have reached Berlin in this war until that moment is reached.
So even with the road ahead and the broad ideological capture in the educational system, how significant is it, Jay, to have leverage in the federal government pushing against gender ideology, particularly when you contrast it with the Biden administration?
For the last 4 years, those of us working in the policy arena to fight gender ideology have basically played whack-a-mole in Washington, D.C. The best we could do is slow down terrible laws, terrible regulations like the Biden administration's attempt to redefine sex in Title IX to include sexual orientation and gender identity. This was just massive force coming down upon us. And so we worked almost entirely in red states where we could make some kind of progress. But the truth of the matter is that long term, we have a federated system, and states ultimately can't just go their own way if the federal government is pointing the other way. That's all changed. I mean, honestly, most of us, we'd gotten used to thinking of federal agencies as essentially our opponents. And now suddenly we have agencies from the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Justice to State Department that are not only allies, but they're actively involved in this fight. That it's clear the Department of Justice is going to start litigating in terms of civil rights on this issue, which is a long time coming. Of course, the administration itself is led with its executive orders and massive bully pulpit of President Trump. The State Department turned on a dime from advocating gender ideology everywhere to explicitly repudiating it. It's the kind of reversal of fortunes that would be very hard to have predicted beforehand because it seems so unlikely, but it's exactly what's happened. The truth of the matter is, though, is that we have limited time. I mean, there will be midterm elections in, 17 or 18 months, President Trump's last term. We need to make major progress on this and show that it actually makes a difference. And I honestly think that the President Trump's leadership on this could make all the difference in the world, because there are millions and millions of parents and moms in particular who have been touched and affected directly by this issue. They are paying attention, and there's nothing like that energy on the other side. There's some crazy ideology, but there's nothing like the personal energy and the power of a mother protecting her children. That's the force that the gender ideologues decided to come up against. It turns out that force is important in the American electorate, and we might have had every major institution from the press to the federal agencies to the schools against us, but we have the American people with us, and we now have an administration in Washington, D.C. that's not only with us, but is advancing the fight and advancing the battle.
How did President Trump do it? How did he tap into the frustration? In the final stretch of the campaign, President Trump said repeatedly at rallies that he would ban men and women's sports, end gender indoctrination in schools, and, depending on the audience, sign a bill prohibiting the sexual mutilation of minors in all 50 states. His running mate, J.D. Vance, also spoke about the scourge of child gender transitions on the campaign trail, most memorably during his 3-hour-long interview with Joe Rogan. What was deemed one of the most effective political messages during the 2024 election season was Trump's ad showing Vice President Kamala Harris's support for taxpayer-funded trans surgery for prisoners and detained migrants. The ad contained the snarky line, "Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you," and it was strategically aired during football games. According to Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project, these issues will continue to be a winner for Republicans because Americans across the spectrum are rejecting gender ideology, and its harms have finally become visible.
President Trump spent millions and millions of dollars attacking Kamala in a very popular campaign ad. It was the most widely seen campaign ad, most impactful campaign ad of the entire cycle. And it was pointing out the fact that Kamala's radical record on cultural issues like supporting transgenderism put her out of step with the American people. The catchphrase that Donald Trump used, and I've heard rumors that he was the one that came up with it, was Kamala's for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. And that message really resonated with the American people for a whole host of reasons, primarily because men can't become women and women can't become men. So there's the truthful aspect of it, but also Americans have been feeling attacked and unable to criticize this entire movement that's sterilizing and mutilating children. It's endangering women in their most vulnerable private spaces. It's taking away their opportunities in sports that women, and namely feminists, fought so hard for over the last century. And so it really resonated with voters, so much to the point where the New York Times, which has done a profile on APP every single election using our data and how many votes we shifted, this was the first year they didn't use our data in the cover story. They used the Democrats' data because the Democrats' data showed that it was more powerful than even what we were estimating. So we know this issue works. We know that it's now in politics. We just got done with 4 focus groups in Virginia, all with swing voters. And what our focus group organization that we work with, they're called On Message, what they came back and told us was, Terry, look at these clips. You could have easily written the talking points that these swing voters are using right now. And it wasn't, a divided swing group. These were 10 to 11 people out of a focus group of 13 that were on our side on this. So I think we're going to win very closely, but we just kept spending money. We just kept batting our head against the wall, showing politicians these issues work. The swing voters are not with Democrats on this. Even Democrats aren't with Democrats on this issue. 67% of Democrats are against men and women's sports. 67% are, no, even higher. I'm sorry, only 10% of America actually supports giving kids sex change procedures. 10%. So we're not even talking 60-40 or 70-30, we're talking 90-10. The Democrats have really caused themselves a serious problem and headache that they're going to have to figure out here soon enough.
So, Terry, what would you say to those who say, well, Republicans are just cynically using the issue as the latest front in their ongoing culture wars? And isn't it true that some Republicans have resisted the issue?
The reality is this fight started off by going after Republicans first, right? We made examples of several Republicans. This was not an issue that we invented out of whole cloth to help the Republican Party win. In fact, Republicans were some of our biggest enemies in the beginning. So the idea that we would just invent this issue to help out Republicans like Kristi Noem or Nancy Mace or Elise Stefanik or any of these other guys, it's just ridiculous. This issue has become so powerful that we've won over converts, right? Kristi Noem vetoed the women's sports bill in the throes of it. And what people don't realize is that there were other very prominent governors who were slow walking their bills at that time, but because they saw the backlash to Kristi Noem, they all got in line. One of these governors signed his bill to protect women's sports on the first day of Pride Month because he didn't want the Kristi Noem treatment. This was not about helping the Republican Party. This was about helping the American people, specifically the children that have been killed and hurt and maimed by this horrific movement, but also the parents that are suffering, that are having their families split up and divided. This is a real issue. I know that this is like the hot take from Hollywood and from the news media and from the DC bubble, but the reality is Democrats do this stuff all the time. I mean, every time you hear someone talking about cuts to Social Security or Medicare, no one's talking about doing that. The only people talking about doing that are Democrats, and that is a politically driven movement. They're trying to create something out of thin air for political benefit. This is a real movement. They are transing kids. They are putting boys into girls' sports. They're putting men into women's private spaces. It's a very real threat, and we're responding to it, and we're addressing it in peaceful ways by showing up to the ballot box, by organizing politically. This is literally the prescription that we've been given, not just by our founding fathers, but it's the prescription that every other left-wing group has ever followed to get any type of change done here. We're just following it bigger and better than they've ever done before, and I think they're jealous.
Do you think that President Trump truly gets it, Terry? Has he seen the photos of, for example, young women on Instagram who've had their breasts amputated? Is he aware of the thousands of minors who've undergone these surgeries? Does he understand how extensive and deep this goes across culture?
Yeah, it's interesting. We filmed a documentary with him called The Culture War about all this crazy woke stuff that was being pushed in the military. He sat down with us for about 45 minutes to an hour. And first of all, I was blown away by who he was one-on-one. He's not who the media portrays him to be. He actually has like a grandfatherly patriarch type presence, very calm, very polite, very inquisitive, right? The thing that blew me away was that he didn't really opine very much with us. He asked us a lot of questions, and he wanted to know what our thoughts were on the JD pick. Oh, well, would you have been okay if we went with Marco? But like that type of stuff. And But when I showed him the vote impact report from 2022 on women's sports and gender surgeries for minors. And I said, Mr. President, the smartest political position you've ever staked out has been the women's sports and protecting kids issue from this whole trans nonsense. It's such a big winner. It shifted 37,000 votes in Arizona. If you can see here, 32,000 votes in Wisconsin. This is a huge winner. You got to keep it up. And he looked at me, he goes, oh, yeah, no, what they're doing to these kids is atrocious. I mean, but I'll tell you what, Brandon, he took it a step further, because it's one thing to look at the immediate victims, but he looks at it as not just the immediate victims, them too, but the secondary victims, the parents, the families that are getting split up and broken up over this. Like, I mean, we all go through phases when we're in our teenage years. I wanted to be a skateboarder, then I wanted to be a punk rock, get a bassist. To split up my family over these trends, these teenage fads that you go through, it's just crazy. But that's what these people are doing. So I just think President Trump understands the gravity of the issue. I think he knows it. I really do. I know he does, because of the look in his face and how he was just super solemn when I talked to him about it. And even when we asked him about why he banned the military from paying for and allowing transition-related surgeries and treatment in the military, he was very direct about it. He said, look, I talked to all the generals. I looked at the military guidelines. You can't be on drugs. And these people have to be on lots of drugs. You know, we don't let people on insulin in the military if you're diabetic. This is the same thing. We got to be compassionate towards people. But these surgeries, these drugs, they cost lots of money. Some of them hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I don't know. I think he totally understands it. Even more importantly, he understands the politics of it.
Understanding the politics of an issue is one thing. Securing legal wins and accomplishing policy goals is another. What does the landscape look like now in the courts, where lawyers are bringing cases to contest the grip of gender ideology on the law? I asked Kate Anderson, an attorney with Alliance Defending Freedom, who has been working on the parental rights angle, particularly as it pertains to the direction of their children's education.
What we have is finally a federal government that is reasonable on this issue and is trying to support good, reasonable, common sense policies that protect everybody. What that does is essentially get the federal government out of the way so that local school districts, local communities, local city and county governments can pass common sense policies that respect everybody's rights on issues like free speech, religious freedom, on other issues that gender ideology is impacting. And so having the federal government pull themselves out of the way and allow these policies is going to have huge impact. You also have, with the executive orders, the federal government affirmatively saying, we want these good Constitution respecting policies to be in place. So there are instructions through those executive orders to the various agencies to make changes to Title IX, to wipe away some of the policies under the Biden and even Obama administration that put gender ideology into the schools and forced it into schools that did not want it. So I think that is going to bring about a change, but the work is certainly far from done.
So, Kate, as a lawyer in these trenches, do you think that the executive orders will last and prove to be effective in the courts?
You see the executive orders also trying to wipe away a few of the policies from the last administrations, things that said that violated student privacy, issues with secret social transition policies where schools are treating students as the opposite sex while hiding it from their parents. So some of the executive orders spoke to some of those issues. But really what I think you're going to see kind of coming out of these challenges, it's hard for the courts to really hold on to and make a ruling on an executive order that is really designed to say, this is my policy and this is the information I want from my agencies. It's once the agencies take action that I think you're going to see litigation that really has a result on some of these issues. So there is some to see in this next stage of the administration, what exactly those agencies are going to do. And I think you're going to see them speaking into women's sports, into some of the medicalization issues, and hopefully the indoctrination and secret transition policies. We at ADF have a number of cases on those issues because those are very much in play in many of the public schools. But you're seeing some of this litigation back and forth as different groups posture over these policies while they wait to see how the agencies are going to implement them.
So what legal disputes are currently percolating, and what are we likely to see in the coming months?
We have a number of cases on this issue. We have one in New York, we have one in Michigan, we have one in New Jersey, and there are a number of other cases around the country where this issue is being litigated. Do parents have the constitutional right to direct the upbringing and education of their kids? And is it violated when a school hides a student's gender identity from their parents? Taking our Michigan case as an example, this was a middle school aged girl that her school began to push her to identify as a boy. She was diagnosed with autism. Her family was working very, very closely with the school on an IEP plan, sharing medical information, meeting regularly with counselors. They came to find out that this whole time, these counselors and these staff members that they were working with were treating their daughter as a boy and hiding it from them. They even went so far as to change her name in records that they were sending home to the parents to affirmatively hide her identity that she was going by at school, all this time pretending that they were working with the parents for this child's best interest. This is dangerous because kids need their parents, especially when they're dealing with something as difficult as their identity. And yet the schools and many of these gender identity related policies are designed to keep kids from working through this with their parents and from having the people who know them and care about them most working through these difficult issues with them. And that's become a huge issue that I'm hopeful the administration will weigh in on, but there are many courts that are poised to weigh in on this soon. Parental rights are not a Christian or conservative issue. They're an issue for everybody because it's an attack on free speech. It's an attack on religious freedom. It's an attack on parents' abilities to be the one to choose what goes on with their kids, to make their decisions and raise their kids. And that's not a value judgment on what decisions those parents make. It's a decision that parents need to be the ones in control, not the government. They know their kids best. They have known their kids the longest, and they will know those kids long after a teacher is out of their lives. And so making sure that we as a culture hold on to that truth, that that parent-child relationship is critically important, that kids need their parents. And so I have conversations all the time with people who do not agree with me on any other issue, but say, this idea that the government gets to decide what happens to my kid is not okay. Parental rights matter because kids matter. And parents are the ones that know their kids best, that have known their kids the longest, that will know them long, long into the future. And they are the ones best positioned to know everything that's going on with a kid. That's why we're fighting for parental rights, because parents need to be the ones to direct their kids' education and upbringing, to help their kids through difficult situations, through struggles with their own identity, through whatever they encounter. And this idea that is currently in culture that the government knows better than parents is false. And I think in the heart of every parent, no matter where they land on the political spectrum, they know that they should be the one to guide and raise their children. And they want the ability to do that. And that's what we're fighting for right now in this culture.
How long will this favorable political window at the federal level last? According to Terry Schilling, time is of the essence.
We have to destroy the gender industry. And we have to do it now. We can't wait. We can't mess around and just keep these issues alive for elections, because this is an industry. It's not a civil rights movement. It would be much easier to defeat if it was a civil rights movement. But instead, it's the transgender industry. Right now, they're making $4.5 billion, and that's just off of surgeries and hormone treatments. That's not even counting the revision surgeries. It's not counting the popular media that's being produced and made money off of. It's not counting any of that. If we don't defeat it now and at least cut off their taxpayer funding of it in this upcoming federal budget that we have coming up, we will continue to lose this battle, because if they have an unlimited spigot of money that they can just pour resources into, there will be what's called battle fatigue. People will get sick and tired of hearing it, and they'll say, why haven't you beaten this monstrosity yet? It must be that we've been losing. So we have to turn off their spigots and the funding mechanisms that they've been using. Otherwise, they will win, and they will shut down our ability to ever even oppose it vocally or even in our heads with prayers like they're doing in the UK, right? If you just stand outside a clinic in the UK with a sign, you don't have to hold a sign. You should just be holding a rosary. You will go to jail for intimidation. We have to win now, because if we don't, we'll lose our ability to oppose it. And that's when it gets really dangerous and treacherous. This is dystopian, new world stuff. The literal point of the entire transgender industry and the movement was to destroy gender, destroy the concept of what a man is, destroy the concept of what a woman is, to make them all just one human being. That's not a beautiful world. That's an ugly world. Men are beautiful. Women are beautiful. We complement each other. Whatever happened to diversity? We need diversity between the genders. I support gender diversity, but only two, right? That's the ideal. And they'll shut down our opposition. So we have to win now. Otherwise, we won't be able to fight against them in the future. So we have to win. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, as Thomas Jefferson said. He was exactly right, and we need to be on top of this. And we need to make sure Democrats pay a price anytime they try to sterilize children, anytime they try to endanger our daughters in their private spaces or sports. We need to be there just to knock them down. We can never let this fight come back again. We've got to beat it and defeat it now and make sure it can never come back again.
Next time on Generation Indoctrination, we'll travel to the Deep South and examine how one state uncovered astonishing information about the gender industry and thereby helped bring about many of the changes we're now seeing at the federal level. Stay tuned.